Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today, we're talking about why you should slow it down. And when I say slow it down, I mean slow down your printer. Well, and lately, I know this goes against all forms of thinking because everyone's like, man, I want to get my prints done super fast so I can, let them sit in that box of shame that I'm not painting. I'm looking at you, people. Anyway, my point is that this episode is dedicated to everybody who has failed prints because their printer is just too darn fast. And a lot of these modern printers have come out with this idea that faster is actually what we all want. Well, I mean, okay, sure. In a perfect world, I'd love to get my prints done in 2 hours, no matter how big they are, but I'm not dumb and I realize that that's not a good idea. Printing out a giant part really, really quickly probably means you're going to sacrifice either quality or you're going to wind up with loads of layer lines or just other issues that are going to occur because of the fact that you're trying to speed up that printing process so much. For example, I don't really like working with fast resins, but some of the printers that I work with can use them. I don't really like it because I don't really care for the fact that it creates, usually for me, creates layer lining issues. And that's because you're only curing the resin for like about a second and a half. And honestly, I'm going to be honest with you, unless you're blasting 100% light cure, that's not going to really be enough to give it a good solid cure in between each layer. Yes, sure, some of these fast resins are meant for high fast time curing, but then on top of that, people will then crank the speed of their retract and their lift all the way up to as far as they can get them to go. And really, you're just going, hey man, can I fail? Can I have this print fail? I know I saved 5 hours on that slice and the print, but hey, you know what? It failed. So guess what? You still wasted time. Anyway, we're going to go over a couple different factors of what I like to do and how I adjust my speeds, and something that came up with me recently on a couple of issues with some customers where I actually had to kind of like step back and say, okay, well, maybe we're printing too fast, which is something that commonly people will do. Now, some people don't even know you can adjust the speed of the printer. This is an episode for you guys. Here we go. Let's check it out. All right, so we're here in my slicer and we're taking a look at just a couple different resin profiles I have set up, and I'm going to show you all what I mean. So the manufacturer's default and usually the recommended, if we go here, I'll see if I can actually find default. Here's the default resin profile. You see, look at it, 2.5 seconds. I want you to know something. When I first started printing, I tried printing around 2.5 seconds. This never worked. I had so many failures, and although it does say it has a 63% success ratio, someone's lying. Anyway, we'll go ahead and add this profile, and let's go ahead and take a look. So as you can see here, you have your burn-in layers, you've got your exposure time. For the burn-in layers, you've got your transition count, you've got your lift distance, your lift speed, your retract speed, and then on the other side here, for your normal layers, you have your layer thickness, light off delay, which is important. Everyone, and I will explain more of that in a minute. Exposure time, which is per layer, your lift and your retract and your lift speed, as well as distance. You also have scale, which we don't mess with that. Please don't mess with that. Your resin stuff, you can mess with this if you want over here. And I don't ever mess with the override settings because honestly, I'm not going to calculate it any better. I'm just going to wait for the printer to tell me how long it's going to take. I don't really care that much. Down here we have compensation. I also don't mess with this on any of my printers either. So we're not looking at that right now. Anyway, what we're talking about is exposure time, and we're talking about speed. So let's talk about that. So first of all, let's take a look at what the default manufacturer's recommended settings actually are. So lift speed, they're saying should be 60 to 180 millimeters or mm slash m essentially as a speed, distance or lift speed rather. And that's the bottom number will be the lowest side of the speed, and then the upper number would be the higher side of the speed. I will show you guys in a minute how I've adjusted some of this on my end to make mine a little bit slower. But first, we're just looking at the way that this is set up by default. Our exposure time on the bottom is 30, which actually is not bad. I only increased mine a little bit. I think it was like 32, 35. In some cases, depending on if it gets a little chilly, I'll bring it up to 40. just to increase the exposure time, to make sure that I don't have any issues with cold weather. Not that it ever freezes or anything where I am, but still, I mean, it still gets cold enough that there's definitely concerns about the resin being cold. Anyway, the transition count and the number of layers should, I always like to keep these the same, regardless. Sometimes I'll adjust this and make this, 4 instead of 6, but I'll try to keep it even units where if I go like 6, this will be 4, or if this is 8, this will be 6, and so on. Um, it's just a habit of mine. It's not, there's no science to that. This is just how I do it. And I've been doing this for a number of years, and I'm going to say I have about a 99.9% success ratio on most of my stuff. So pretty good track record. Anyway, we'll go down here to lift distance. So lift distance is actually rather important. Depending on the size of your printer, you want to lift a little further, right? So if you have a bigger vat, you have a taller printer, you want to lift up a little higher because you want to be able to lift high enough that it's going to snap away from the vat. Otherwise, if you don't lift high enough, you're not going to do that. So you want to have your bottom number be at least high enough that it's going to be able to pull away. And the best way to calculate that, honestly, look at whatever the manufacturer recommends, and that is what I would use for your distance. You can make it go a little further. You can even adjust it to go maybe a little bit closer because it doesn't always need to go as high as they recommend. That's like maximum stretch distance as far as I'm concerned. But my suggestion would be to either keep it where it is or increase it just a little bit if you're worried about the pullback not coming off easy enough, or if you have a lot of failed prints where they're initially sticking. That might be something to try. Also, increasing your bottom exposure time might be something to try as well. In general, just because the bottom exposure time being 30 may not work for you. Your environment may not be the right environment for this to work. Remember, all of these results, everything that they always tell you to use, manufacturers' recommended settings, are all based on laboratories. We don't work in laboratories. I don't work in a laboratory. I work in a garage. Okay, there's quite a bit of factors in there that I have no control over, including humidity, which I know can have an effect on everything. So in general, I think it's just smart to recognize that you just have to kind of test and see what works for you, both in your environment and for your printer. I think that's important to understand that everything is going to be a little bit different for every kind of printer as well. You're going to have different, your settings are going to be a little different because, your printer is going to be taller, or if your printer is wider or whatever, or different printers. Even my printers, I can look at two different ones and show you that they're going to be different completely, based on just the manufacturer's recommended settings. And then the way I'll adjust them will be just slightly stepped down just to give them a little bit of a slowdown. So we look here, the lift speed 60 to 180, and then the retract speed 180 to 60. Now you notice those are reversed, and that's exactly how they should be. But these, again, a little fast, and I would actually reduce these. In the initial, if you look at the initial settings for this particular printer, this is actually meant to be pretty quick. So the 60 to 180, as far as that speed-wise, that's actually pretty quick. And if you leave it at that default speed, it will actually move pretty quickly. It gets prints done quite fast. And I'm not saying you can't have successful prints at this speed. You will, and you totally can. But you actually have a greater rate of success and a lower rate of failure if you go ahead and just slow it down just a little bit. So let's go ahead and take a look at my adjusted settings. And I'll show you what I mean. Okay. So now what I've done here is you'll see I've adjusted, and actually look at that. I lied. So my number of transition layers on the bottom is 5, and I actually only have 2 on my transition count. And the reason I believe I once adjusted this to 4, but I decided to add 1 additional layer because I kept getting some initial failures on some of my initial tests. And so I decided 1 extra layer, and that actually made it stick. 45 seconds, I added an additional 15 seconds to the exposure time. I believe initially I had said 35 or 35 to 40. Now, that is true. I will sometimes lower those exposure times, especially when it gets really warm in the summer and my workshop and the garage gets really hot. I will actually take these down to 35, maybe 40, but never to 30. 30 is too low, in my opinion. Your transition count, again, I've lowered that to 2. But notice what I've done here with the lift distance. The lift distance I've actually increased almost double. And actually more than double on the other side. I've got it going 6 to 10. Now, the reason I have done this is because I am absolutely ensuring that it's going to release from the vat. Okay, the FEP is going to snap away. It is going to release. You are going to have far less failures if you give this initial lift distance a boost. Okay, that's a really good one right there. Now the lift speed I have turned down a little bit on both sides, so we have decreased that to 2 millimeters per second, and then on a retract speed I have reduced that to 3 to 6 millimeters per second, versus where it was at 60 and 180 mm instead of different measurements here. I'll show you. We can switch back. See 180 to 360. So you can see the difference there. It's a little bit faster on one side as far as retract, but see the difference is that the retract speed is what it's not the problem. That's actually coming back down. So having it go a little bit faster on the way down isn't an issue. You don't want to have it go faster on the way back up. Okay. So anyway, again, these all work in two stages. Not every printer has the ability to work in two stages. I believe for a while there, the Anycubic printers didn't actually allow the two-stage control. I believe some of the newer ones now do. I'm not even sure that the 4K actually allows the two-stage control. There might have been a firmware update ages ago I installed that I just forgot about. But anyway, the two-stage control thing is, again, some printers do, some printers don't. But as I've adjusted it here, the only issue that you're going to find is my adjustments will add hours of print time. So if we were to look at a particular print file or something, if we're adding, not only we're adding 15 seconds per layer there, we're adding almost a full second to the exposure time. We've turned the light delay down a little bit to half a second rather than a second. And again, I haven't talked about light delay, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So light delay is actually rather important because light delay is the amount of time that you give the light to kind of wait before it turns on. So essentially everything kind of gets into place. The plate comes down, everything settles, and it gives it a delay essentially for the resin to flow, and then it flashes the light. If your light delay is longer, obviously it's going to wait longer. But this is also every bit of second you add or every bit of millisecond you add to that, you're adding more print time. So light delay can be tuned down if you have a viscosity of resin that's really thin. So if you're not working with really thick resins, you can actually turn that down and you can save yourself some time. Now, if you're working with texture resins or DLP or casting resins or something like that, they can sometimes be on the thicker side. The texture resin is a little bit thinner than the DLP resin. DLP resin was more like pancake batter. The texture resin is more like a Danimal. I mean, it's like a really thin yogurt. So they're thick, but they're not like super chunky thick. I've seen far worse as far as density is concerned as resins. So yeah, again, guys, slow down your print process. Don't go fast with your exposures. Increase the time on that. And I know this sounds crazy, and a lot of people talk about losing detail because you're overexposing a piece. I have never had this issue. My pieces come out looking amazing because I'm using 14K resin on a 4K printer, and I'm still getting amazing results. So trust me on this. Increase your exposure times on the bottom. Decrease your lift speed. Bring your lift distance up. And then you can increase your retract speed to save some time on bringing it down. Because again, retraction, you can make faster if you want. That's not going to hurt anything. The lift, you want slow. So you can save yourself some time there because I know all of this is going to add time. I fully understand that. Everybody's like, but man, it's going to make my print take forever. No, it's just going to take a lot longer than it normally would. When I printed miniatures, I think originally when I was using some of the initial settings, like 30, 35 seconds or whatever, and I got some failures and whatever, they could print really quick and get a print done like hour and a half, 2 hours. With this particular timing and the way this is set up, that would turn this into about 4.5, maybe 5 hours. And honestly, I don't mind waiting the additional time because I would rather wait for the print and have it work. than come back and find that it failed. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I want everyone to kind of take away from this. Look, I get it. Some printers are even sold on the whole aspect of being fast. Fine. That's the manufacturers. That's on them. I really don't agree with it. I don't think that it's the way to go. I've actually talked to a number of professionals in this field as well who feel the same way. And they don't think that rushing through a print job is definitely not the way to do it. Professional systems don't specialize in doing it fast, they specialize in doing it well and doing it efficiently. So that's the only thing that these guys should really be focusing on. And the one thing, if I could take one thing away, the manufacturers just need to focus more on making their printers work well and making them work efficiently. It's not about fast, guys. Yeah, I get it. Some of us are going to try and figure out the fastest way to print a benchy, or the fastest way to do a test print, or the fastest way to get their print done. But to be honest, all you're doing is you're stressing your machines and you're pushing them to limits that they really weren't built for. And at the end of the day, you're just wasting money and time. So take my advice, slow it down. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We'll see you all again real soon. Bye bye.